The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the tension in the air palpable. The doors creaked open, and in walked Elon Musk, his posture straight and his gaze unwavering. The media, cameras flashing, instantly zeroed in on him. To them, he was just another tech mogul who had pushed the boundaries of space, electric cars, and artificial intelligence. But today, he was about to face a completely different battle, one that would determine not just his reputation, but his very future. The case was high profile, drawing attention from every corner of the media world. This wasn't about launching rockets to Mars or revolutionizing the automotive industry anymore. This time, it was personal. Musk was in court, accused of misleading investors and inflating the value of his companies. The plaintiff's side had made sure to paint him as a reckless businessman who thought he was untouchable. And the courtroom echoed with their expectations. Many believed he wouldn't last long under pressure. A man used to the spotlight of innovation and technology now had to prove himself in a world of cold, calculating legalities. Elon's presence in the courtroom seemed almost surreal. His name had become synonymous with game-changing technology. But here, in front of a jury, he was no longer the founder of Tesla or SpaceX, he was just a defendant. The stakes had never been higher. His reputation, his companies, even his legacy, hung in the balance. From the moment he entered, a murmur spread through the room. The opposing counsel, a sharp, well-dressed attorney with a reputation for taking down giants, wasted no time. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "we are here today because of a man who has continuously abused his influence to mislead investors, misrepresent facts, and put his own financial interests above the well-being of the very people who trusted him." The courtroom fell into a hush. Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, but his face remained impassive, almost detached. He wasn't the type to show emotion in public, and it seemed like today would be no different. But the tension was building, and the air felt thick with anticipation. The defense team had prepared for a rough battle, but no one expected the onslaught that began in the next few minutes. The attorney launched into a barrage of criticisms. He showed emails and tweets from Musk, painting a picture of a man who couldn't be trusted. Musk has demonstrated time and again, the lawyer argued, that he believes he is above the law. Elon shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie, but his face remained unreadable. There were those who mocked him in private, calling him arrogant, dismissive, and reckless. The media portrayed him as unpredictable, sometimes volatile. But there was one thing the world didn't realize: beneath that exterior, Elon Musk was playing a far deeper game than anyone could comprehend. The courtroom shifted focus as Musk was called to the stand. The sound of his name echoed through the chambers, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. This was the moment that would define everything. Would he crumble under the pressure, or would he rise above the ridicule? Would his mind, brilliant as it was in the realms of technology and innovation, be able to navigate the complexities of the legal system? He stood, walking slowly toward the witness box, every step measured, deliberate. The murmurs of the gallery died down as he took his seat. The attorney began with a simple question: "Mr. Musk, can you explain why you believe your statements to investors were not misleading?" Elon's voice, steady and calm, broke the silence. "The truth is, I never misled anyone," he began, his words cutting through the room with quiet conviction. "I've always believed that transparency is key in my businesses. Everything I've done, every decision I've made, has been about creating a future that benefits all of us, even if some of the choices were bold or unconventional." The lawyer didn't let up, immediately countering with a series of pointed questions. "So you're saying that when you tweeted that Tesla would be going private at $420 a share, you didn't expect it to be taken as a promise by investors?" Elon paused for a moment, his eyes glinting with a subtle intensity. "That tweet was a discussion, not a guarantee. I believed at the time that it was a possibility. But ultimately, it didn't happen. I can't control how people interpret my words, but I never intended to mislead anyone." The attorney shook his head, clearly unimpressed. "A discussion? A possibility? You run multi-billion-dollar companies, Mr. Musk. Don't you think words like those are more than just casual musings? Elon didn't flinch. I understand the weight of my words, and I take full responsibility for the outcome. But let's be clear, my intention was never to deceive. My intention was always to push forward, to create, to change the world. The gallery was silent. The opposing counsel, sensing that his argument wasn't getting through, shifted tactics. But Mr. Musk, isn't it true that you have a history of making bold, impulsive statements that end up creating chaos in your businesses? How can the court trust you when your own employees and investors have been put in difficult positions because of your words? Elon leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. He could feel the pressure mounting, but he refused to let it show. Sometimes, when you push boundaries, things don't always go according to plan. But that doesn't mean you stop pushing. Progress isn't easy. If you want to change the world, you have to take risks, even when it means facing uncertainty. The lawyer was clearly getting frustrated. But these aren't just risks, Mr. Musk. These are actions that have consequences. They affect real people, real investors, real families. Elon sat up straighter, his expression hardening. And I understand that. I've seen it. I've lived it. But what you're asking for isn't progress. You're asking for stagnation. And I won't be a part of that. The courtroom remained still for a long moment, the tension in the air almost suffocating. The media, which had been skeptical of Musk's ability to handle the trial, was now watching closely. Some had started to shift their opinion. Maybe Musk wasn't as out of his element as they thought. As the attorney retreated to prepare for his next line of questioning, Elon sat back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. He knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, and the ridicule would only grow. But in this moment, something had shifted. There was a sense that this wasn't just a legal battle, it was a battle for his very identity. And Elon Musk wasn't going to back down. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk was not born into wealth, nor did he inherit a legacy of privilege. Instead, his story began on a modest street in Pretoria, South Africa, where he was raised by a mother who was a dietitian and a father who was an engineer. From a young age, Elon exhibited an unyielding curiosity that set him apart from other children. While his peers spent their days playing games, young Elon could often be found devouring books, his mind always 2 steps ahead, constantly asking questions that others didn't think to ask. His father, Elon Musk, was an ambitious engineer, but their relationship was strained. Elon was often described as distant, unemotional, and critical, traits that created a cold environment for Elon to grow up in. It wasn't long before Elon became frustrated with the lack of emotional support at home. Still, his father's technical influence remained with him, shaping Elon's natural inclination toward understanding how things worked. His mother, Musk, was a model and a dietitian who worked hard to make ends meet. Despite the family's financial struggles, she provided a loving and supportive environment. She encouraged Elon's intellectual growth, always pushing him to pursue his interests, no matter how unconventional they seemed. When Elon was 10, he developed an obsession with computers and programming. His parents, recognizing his potential, bought him a computer, a decision that would change the trajectory of his life. By the time he was 12, Elon had taught himself computer programming and developed his first video game, Blaster. He sold the game for around $500, which, for a 12-year-old, was a small fortune. But it wasn't about the money, it was about proving that his ideas could have an impact. By the time Elon reached his teenage years, his social life was far from typical. He was bullied at school, often the target of ridicule for being different. He was quiet, introspective, and absorbed in his thoughts. His classmates couldn't understand his intense desire to change the world, and so, they made him an outcast. But rather than breaking him, it fueled his drive. Elon's early life was a paradox, bright, driven, but alienated. His passion for technology was so consuming that he often didn't have time to nurture friendships. This loneliness followed him even into adulthood, though he never let it deter him. It became a silent force pushing him to succeed. His focus wasn't on fitting in with the crowd, it was on being the best version of himself, even if that meant sacrificing personal happiness. At 17, Elon left South Africa to attend Queen's University in Canada, seeking both an escape and a future filled with opportunities. His move wasn't just about pursuing education, it was about creating a path to something greater, something that didn't exist in his home country. But it wasn't easy. He had very little money when he first arrived, relying on his mother for financial support. However, Elon's drive was unwavering. He was already thinking about the future in ways that most people his age couldn't fathom. His time at Queen's University was short-lived, and by 1992, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. There, he studied economics and physics, two fields that would shape his thinking and approach to business. It was at Penn where Elon's vision truly began to crystallize. He was no longer just a curious young man obsessed with technology, he was becoming a visionary, a man who could see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. Upon graduation, Elon moved to California to pursue a PhD at Stanford. However, within just 2 days of starting the program, he dropped out. It was a decision that would shock those around him, but for Elon, it made perfect sense. The world was shifting toward the internet, and he knew this was the moment to dive in. His mind was already on the future, and he couldn't afford to wait. Elon's first major venture, Zip2, was born out of his desire to bring a technological revolution to the traditional media industry. Working out of a small office with his brother Kimball, he poured everything into making Zip2 a success. The company was eventually sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million, giving Elon his first taste of financial success. But for him, money wasn't the real reward, it was the validation that his ideas could become reality. The sale of Zip2 provided the seed money for X.com, an online payment company that would eventually become PayPal. It was during this time that Elon's business philosophy began to take shape. He wasn't interested in building just another company, he was intent on changing the world. The payment system that PayPal became was just the beginning. He wanted to reshape industries, challenge existing paradigms, and create the future. As PayPal grew, so did Elon's influence. But not everyone was on board with his unconventional methods. He was often seen as a difficult leader, willing to push his employees hard in order to achieve his vision. His brash approach, combined with his sharp intellect, made him a polarizing figure. But it was that same drive and determination that propelled PayPal to its eventual sale to eBay for $1.5 billion. Even with millions of dollars in his bank account, Elon wasn't satisfied. The money was never the goal, it was just a tool to create bigger, bolder ideas. His ambitions were not limited to tech or finance, he wanted to leave a legacy that would define humanity's future. This vision would soon lead him to the creation of Tesla and SpaceX, two companies that would forever change the world. But it wasn't an easy path. Along the way, Elon faced personal challenges that threatened to unravel everything he had worked for. His marriage to Justine Musk ended in divorce, and later, his high-profile relationships and business pressures would make headlines. Despite it all, he pressed on, focusing on the long-term goals rather than the immediate obstacles. In the midst of his rising fame, Musk's image became more complex. The public saw a man who wasn't afraid to take risks, to challenge authority, and to stand firm in his convictions. But behind the scenes, he faced immense pressure. His ambitious projects were often years behind schedule, and he struggled with maintaining personal relationships. His unrelenting drive left little room for anything else, and sometimes, it seemed like he was sacrificing his own well-being in pursuit of a dream. As the years passed, Elon Musk became a figure both admired and feared. He was a symbol of innovation, but also a lightning rod for controversy. His boldness on social media, his relentless pursuit of goals, and his willingness to face overwhelming odds made him a larger-than-life figure. But for all his success, there remained an undercurrent of doubt. Was he really a visionary? Or was he just a man who, at times, failed to see the consequences of his actions? In the courtroom, Elon Musk was about to face the latest test of his legacy. The question was no longer whether his ventures could change the world, they had already done that. The question now was whether he could navigate the world of high-stakes legal battles, public perception, and personal responsibility. The stakes were higher than ever before. Elon's past, his successes, and his failures had led him to this moment. And it was here, in the glare of the courtroom lights, that the next chapter of his story would unfold. As the courtroom drama continued, the pressure on Elon Musk began to mount. The first few days had been filled with a series of high-stakes confrontations between Musk and the prosecution, but now the real test began. The stakes were clear: his career, his reputation, and the future of his companies hung in the balance. The prosecution had painted a clear picture of Musk as a man who took risks without regard for the consequences, a man who pushed boundaries without considering the effects on those who trusted him. Elon had already taken the stand, but now the case was entering its most tense phase. The defense team was preparing to counter the relentless attacks. Yet, it was clear that every word Musk spoke in this trial would be scrutinized, every statement dissected, and every decision questioned. The legal team for the prosecution, led by a seasoned lawyer named Raymond Bishop, had already made their mark. He was known for his cutthroat tactics, always going for the jugular when he sensed weakness. And Musk's presence on the stand had only fueled the fire. Bishop's approach was methodical, aimed at exposing what he believed were Musk's consistent failures to respect the legal system. His attacks were sharp, focusing on the infamous 2018 tweets where Musk claimed that he had secured funding to take Tesla private at $420 per share, a statement that, in the eyes of the prosecution, caused a major disruption in the stock market and potentially misled investors. "Mr. Musk," Bishop began, "you stated on Twitter that you had secured funding for a private buyout of Tesla. Can you explain to this court why investors should believe you when there was no actual funding secured at the time?" Elon's fingers drummed on the armrest of the chair, but his face remained calm. He knew the accusations were serious, but he also knew that the truth was on his side. "At the time, I believed that I had a verbal agreement with a private investor, which could have led to a deal," Musk replied, his voice steady. "But ultimately, we were unable to close that deal. The truth is, things didn't play out the way I thought they would. But that doesn't mean I intended to mislead anyone." Bishop wasn't about to let him off the hook. "You knew, Mr. Musk, that public statements like those could move markets. And yet you made those claims without any concrete backup. Do you think that's responsible leadership?" Elon straightened up in his chair, his gaze unwavering. The statement was meant to convey a possibility, not a certainty. "I've always believed that there's a fine line between vision and reality, and sometimes, as a leader, you have to make bold statements. That's how change happens." The courtroom grew tense. Even some of Musk's supporters were beginning to question the wisdom of his approach. Could it be that he had been too bold, too reckless with his words? Could the courtroom now witness the unraveling of one of the most ambitious minds of this generation? The attorney's voice was sharp. "But Mr. Musk, those bold statements didn't just affect you. They impacted investors. They affected the stock market, costing shareholders millions. And now, here you are, sitting in this courtroom, trying to avoid responsibility for the damage caused. How do you justify that?" Musk's eyes narrowed slightly. This was the real test. How would he respond to this barrage of criticism? He took a deep breath, collected himself, and replied with a sense of resolve, "I take responsibility for everything I say, and I've been very transparent about my intentions. But my actions have always been aimed at building something bigger. Sometimes, when you aim high, you miss. But the goal remains the same: create something transformative, something that can change the world. I am willing to take those risks, even when they don't go as planned." For a moment, the room was silent. The weight of his words hung in the air, and even the jury seemed to take a beat before reacting. But Bishop wasn't ready to let Musk off the hook. "I understand your ambition, Mr. Musk," he said with a cold smile, "but what about the people who trusted you? The investors who believed in you and lost their money because of your actions? Shouldn't you be held accountable for that?" Musk's gaze didn't waver. "I understand the consequences of my actions, but what's more important is that I've always acted with a sense of purpose. I didn't get here by playing it safe. I got here by pushing the boundaries of what was possible." The tension in the room was palpable. The prosecution's case seemed to be gathering steam. They had their sights set on the broader picture. Elon Musk, a man who had revolutionized industries, who had reached heights few could even imagine, was now facing the harsh reality of a legal battle. The narrative that had been building over the last few days was one of a man who had built his empire on the foundation of bold ideas but had failed to properly acknowledge the risks those ideas posed. Yet, despite the barrage of questions, Musk's answers remained calm and confident. He didn't waver. His defense team, while clearly under pressure, had a strategy in mind. They weren't going to allow the prosecution to paint Musk as a reckless businessman. They would instead show him as a visionary who, despite his occasional missteps, had brought real, lasting change to the world. As the trial wore on, the tension only intensified. The prosecution's case focused on the chaos Musk had caused with his tweets, highlighting the market volatility and investor confusion that followed. The defense, however, countered by showing Musk's long track record of success and innovation. They argued that his mistakes, while regrettable, were part of the process of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But it wasn't just the legal arguments that made this case so compelling, it was the way Musk responded to the pressure. There was a quiet intensity about him, a steely determination to not just defend himself, but to make the case that his vision for the future was worth the risks. At the heart of the conflict was a simple question. Could the world forgive Elon Musk's reckless ambition, or would the consequences of his actions be too much to overcome? The courtroom buzzed with intensity as Elon Musk's trial progressed. Each day, the prosecution mounted a more focused attack, questioning his every decision, and the media's attention grew to a fever pitch. As public scrutiny ramped up, Musk faced what was becoming one of the greatest battles of his career. But despite the mounting pressure, Elon remained eerily composed. The trial had become not just about defending his business decisions, but about something deeper, the future of his entire vision. The day of reckoning arrived unexpectedly, when Musk's defense team revealed that they had secured a new set of documents. These documents, Elon's legal team claimed, held the key to turning the case around. They had been retrieved from an anonymous source within the Tesla Corporation. An inside whistleblower who had left detailed records about how the company had communicated with investors and the rationale behind Musk's statements on social media. The announcement shook the courtroom, and for the first time in the trial, Elon's confidence seemed to find new energy. The defense team was about to introduce these documents to the jury, and it was clear that they could provide the key to defending Musk's earlier tweets. Elon's critics had claimed that he had misled investors, but these documents appeared to show otherwise. They revealed that Musk had been in ongoing negotiations with potential investors, and that he had genuinely believed in the possibility of taking Tesla private at the time of his now infamous tweet. As the documents were presented, Musk's defense lawyer, Sarah Douglas, carefully laid out the key points. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "Elon Musk did not make a careless statement. He made a statement grounded in his belief, at the time, that funding was indeed secured. The communication he had with investors, as seen in these documents, demonstrates that there was a genuine attempt to reach an agreement. This wasn't a reckless decision, it was a calculated step taken by a man who has always been driven by a desire to revolutionize industries." For the first time in days, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. The jury appeared more attentive, some scribbling down notes, others exchanging quiet whispers. There was a shift in the perception of Musk. The idea that his actions were driven by hope, by a vision of an electric future, was now central to the defense's argument. But the prosecution wasn't going to back down so easily. Raymond Bishop, the lead prosecutor, rose to cross-examine the evidence. His demeanor was confident, but now there was a sense of urgency in his voice. "These documents are indeed intriguing, but let's be clear," Bishop began, his tone cold. Mr. Musk was still making public statements without the necessary proof that his funding was actually secured. Whether or not he believed it to be true is irrelevant. The market was misled. The investors were misled. And now, Mr. Musk has to face the consequences of his actions. Elon, who had been listening intently, stood up when it was his turn to speak. "I'm not here to defend every single mistake I've made. But let me be clear, I've always been open about my intentions. I've always believed that the future of humanity lies in sustainable energy, in space exploration, and in the pursuit of new technologies that can change the world for the better. I may have made a mistake in how I phrased that tweet, but it wasn't done with the intent to deceive anyone." His voice didn't waver as he spoke. For the first time in the trial, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't just about the legalities anymore, it was about his belief in the impossible. About the long nights, the sleepless hours spent in boardrooms and factories, the constant push to make something bigger than himself. Musk was no longer just defending a statement, he was defending his life's work. His every decision had been based on one singular goal, to change the course of history. The prosecution, however, wasn't buying it. They pressed him on his history of bold claims, on his controversial statements about Tesla's future and his own leadership style. They brought up the numerous times Musk had tweeted something speculative, only to see those tweets later blow up into controversies. They emphasized his infamous comment about taking Tesla private at $420 a share, asking Musk whether, in hindsight, he regretted making such statements. "I don't regret trying to take Tesla private," Elon replied, his tone unwavering. "I still believe that Tesla could have been better off as a private company. The only regret I have is the way I communicated it. I should have been more precise, more careful. But my goal has always been to protect Tesla's long-term future, not to deceive anyone. I want what's best for this company, and I've always fought to make it thrive." For a moment, the room was silent. Musk had shifted the conversation away from the legal intricacies and back to his vision. The boldness of his statements, the criticism he faced for daring to dream of a world powered by electric cars and sustainable energy, it all seemed to fall into place. In the midst of all the legal rhetoric, his sincerity shone through. It was then that the defense team introduced another key piece of evidence, Elon's email exchanges with his board members. These emails highlighted Musk's consistent drive to make bold moves, not for financial gain, but for the larger, world-changing purpose he had always pursued. The emails revealed that Musk had shared his thoughts and concerns with Tesla's executives and advisors about the potential ramifications of his statements. This wasn't a man making impulsive, unthought-out decisions, this was a visionary who had a deep understanding of both the risks and the potential rewards. The prosecution, on the other hand, focused on the market's reaction. They painted a picture of chaos, stock prices fluctuating wildly, investor confusion, and the resulting legal fallout. But Elon's team countered, showing that despite the turbulence, Tesla's overall trajectory had remained on course. They argued that while Musk's statements had caused short-term volatility, they had ultimately fueled Tesla's long-term success. Musk's boldness had brought attention to the company, and, in many ways, he was simply ahead of his time. As the trial reached its midpoint, the tension in the courtroom only increased. It had become clear that this wasn't just about whether Musk had misled investors. This trial was about something far greater, the relentless pursuit of a dream, the clash of ambition and consequence. It was about how far a person was willing to go to build something that could change the world, and whether the cost of that ambition was too high. But no matter the outcome of the trial, one thing had become undeniable: Elon Musk had changed the rules of the game. He had forced the world to reckon with his ideas, his ambition, and his ability to push the boundaries of what was thought possible. And in that moment, his journey had reached its most climactic stage. The courtroom was quieter than it had been in days. The defense had laid out their arguments, the prosecution had countered, and now, it seemed like the end was within sight. As the trial reached its climax, all eyes were on Elon Musk, and the weight of the moment seemed to settle heavily on his shoulders. The emotional toll of the trial was starting to show. Musk, who had been cool and composed throughout most of the proceedings, now looked weary. His face had taken on a more somber expression, his movements less assured than before. It wasn't just the legal battle he was fighting, it was the future of everything he had worked for, the future of Tesla, SpaceX, and his broader ambitions. The trial had gone beyond legal arguments. It had become a personal battle, a struggle for his legacy, and the very principles that had driven him to this point. Was he truly a visionary who had taken risks for the greater good, or was he a reckless businessman whose ambition had come at the expense of others? The pivotal moment came when Sarah Douglas, Musk's lead defense attorney, turned to the jury. Her voice, though steady, held an undeniable urgency as she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "you've heard the arguments. You've seen the documents, the emails, the testimony. You've heard the prosecution's theory of recklessness. But let me remind you of something very important. Elon Musk did not just create Tesla and SpaceX for financial gain. He created them because he believes in something greater. He believes in the future, a future powered by sustainable energy, a future where humanity reaches beyond the confines of Earth. This trial is about more than a tweet or a financial statement. It's about the courage to pursue that vision in the face of enormous odds." Douglas paused for a moment, her eyes locking with each member of the jury. "This is not a case about one man's mistakes. This is a case about a man who dared to dream bigger than anyone else and who faced every setback with the belief that the world could, and should, be different." Musk's gaze never wavered as he listened to his attorney's words. The emotional weight of the trial seemed to settle deeper into him. The long days and nights spent in court, the public scrutiny, and the personal toll it had taken were all coming to a head. And then, something happened. For the first time in the trial, Elon Musk opened up in a way that few had seen before. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up, taking a slow breath before addressing the court. "I know I've made mistakes," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I'm not here to pretend that I haven't. But what I've always believed, and what I'll continue to believe, is that the greatest innovations come from taking risks, risks that others are too afraid to take. If you want to change the world, you have to be willing to make bold moves. And sometimes, those moves don't go as planned." His words were simple, but the sincerity behind them hit everyone in the room. For a brief moment, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. The tension that had built up over the past few weeks seemed to dissipate, replaced by something deeper, something human. "I didn't get to where I am today by playing it safe. I did it by pushing the boundaries of what people thought was possible. I made mistakes, yes. But I've also achieved things that people once thought were impossible." Musk's voice broke slightly, but he quickly steadied himself. "I want to create a better world for all of us. I want my children to grow up in a world where we're not dependent on fossil fuels. I want a world where space exploration isn't a dream, but a reality. I want to see humanity thrive, on Earth and beyond." For the first time, the jury seemed to lean in. Even the prosecution team appeared somewhat stunned. Musk had never been this open before, this vulnerable. In that moment, it wasn't just about the legal case anymore, it was about a man whose ambition had changed the world, a man who was willing to risk everything for the greater good. The emotional climax of the trial had arrived, and with it, a sense of vulnerability that no one had expected from the CEO who had built a technological empire. But the prosecution, though moved by Musk's words, was not swayed. They pressed on, highlighting the legal implications of his actions, the damage done to investors, the chaos caused by his statements, and the irreparable harm to public trust. They argued that his emotional appeal, though powerful, did not absolve him of the responsibility he had for misleading investors, regardless of his intentions. As the defense rested, the tension in the courtroom could be cut with a knife. The emotional stakes were higher than ever, and the fate of Elon Musk rested in the hands of the jury. It was no longer just about what he had done. It was about who he was and why he had done it. The question was no longer whether Musk had misled investors with his tweets, but whether the world could forgive a visionary who had pushed the limits of what was possible, even at great personal cost. The defense had made their case. Musk had opened his heart to the jury. Now, it was time for the jury to decide. Would they see a man who had made a mistake but whose vision for the future was worth the risk? Or would they hold him accountable for his words and actions, regardless of his larger aspirations? As the judge called for a recess, the room remained heavy with anticipation. The jury would deliberate. And Musk, his defense team, and even the prosecution knew that the final verdict would not just decide his fate, it would determine whether the world's greatest innovators would be held accountable for their bold ideas, or whether society would allow them the freedom to dream. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. Do you believe bold ambition should be forgiven when it comes from a place of vision? The weight was unbearable. Days passed in silence, with the only sound being the distant hum of courtroom doors opening and closing as lawyers, jurors, and witnesses entered and left. Elon Musk sat alone in his seat, deep in thought, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished wood of the table in front of him. Outside the courtroom, the world continued to spin, but in this room, time seemed to slow. Every minute felt like an eternity. The tension was palpable. After the emotional climax of Musk's defense and the jury's deliberation, the entire courtroom was on edge, waiting for the final decision. The media buzzed with speculation, analysts dissecting every aspect of the trial, drawing conclusions based on Musk's emotional testimony, his past history, and the evidence presented. But for Musk, it wasn't just about public opinion. It wasn't about how the world viewed him in this moment. It was about what came next, his vision, his future, and the bigger picture. He had built his empire by defying conventional wisdom. He had created Tesla and SpaceX to push humanity forward, to make a world where electric vehicles were the norm, where space exploration was no longer a distant dream, and where innovation could transform the planet. But now, in this moment of deep uncertainty, he found himself wondering if he had pushed too hard, too fast. Could one person's ambition, no matter how noble, lead to so much collateral damage? As he sat there, his mind wandered back to his early days in Silicon Valley, where the risks were clear, but the rewards, in his mind, were worth the gamble. Back then, he had known that taking chances was part of the equation. But now, as the weight of the trial bore down on him, Musk couldn't help but reflect on what he had sacrificed. And what he still had to fight for. The jury returned to the courtroom. The room fell into a heavy silence. Every face in the courtroom looked toward the judge, who called the court to order and instructed the foreman of the jury to read the verdict. Musk's breath caught in his chest. His hands, which had been steady throughout the trial, were now trembling ever so slightly. "Will the jury foreman please stand?" the judge asked. The foreman stood, his face unreadable. There was no sign of relief or tension in his features, just the stoic expression of someone who had been deliberating on a decision that would shape the future of a man, and an empire. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty of securities fraud." The words echoed through the courtroom, and for a moment, Musk's heart stopped. He stared at the foreman, his mind struggling to process the relief that flooded through him. His defense team erupted in applause, but Musk remained still. A small breath escaped his lips, and he closed his eyes for a moment, collecting himself. It was as though the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders, but only momentarily. His journey was far from over. The judge banged his gavel, signaling the conclusion of the trial. The room slowly emptied out, but Musk remained in his seat for a few moments longer. He let the words of the verdict sink in. Not guilty. The world had spoken, and his vision remained intact. For now. But as the crowd gathered around him, offering congratulations, Musk's thoughts were already turning inward. The trial had been more than just a legal battle, it had been a test of his very essence as a person. He had always believed that the world needed bold thinkers, those who would push the envelope and dream beyond the limits of possibility. He had fought for the future of humanity, but in doing so, he had been forced to confront the consequences of his ambition. He stood up, shaking hands with his attorneys, his eyes still distant. Despite the win, Musk's mind kept returning to the fundamental question: was it worth it? Could a vision so grand, so disruptive, ever be truly understood in its entirety by the world? Were the sacrifices necessary? And, more importantly, would the people who followed him, his employees, his investors, the very society he was trying to change, still believe in the future he was building? The weight of these thoughts didn't go away in an instant. But as Musk stepped out of the courtroom and into the sunlight, he was reminded of something important. He had made it through this trial, not just because of his wealth or status, but because of the core belief that had driven him all these years. He believed that the world could be better. He believed that the future could be brighter. As he entered his car and began the drive back to his office, Musk's mind wandered to the next challenge on the horizon. There would be no time for celebration. The trial was over, but the work was far from finished. Tesla still had to scale, SpaceX had more missions to launch, and humanity still had to reach the stars. But this trial, in many ways, had been the ultimate test, a test of his resolve, his purpose, and his character. It was a reminder that even the boldest visionaries were held accountable, not just for their successes, but for their failures as well. In the days that followed, Musk would reflect on his journey. The courtroom, the trial, the moments of self-doubt, all of it had been a humbling experience. It reminded him that no matter how big the vision, it had to be grounded in the responsibility of leadership. He had always known that changing the world would come with sacrifices, but this trial had made it painfully clear that even the most well-intentioned risks could carry significant costs. Yet, despite the emotional turmoil, Musk remained resolute. The world needed dreamers, risk-takers, and innovators. And he would continue to lead that charge. Because for all the obstacles, all the challenges, the potential for humanity was worth every battle. And Musk was ready for whatever came next. In the weeks following the verdict, life for Elon Musk quickly returned to its usual pace, except, of course, for the pressure that always accompanied running some of the most ambitious companies in the world. He had spent the last few years battling personal challenges, legal issues, and public scrutiny, but now, a sense of relief permeated the air around him. The trial was behind him. But the hard work ahead was far from over. Musk, however, did not feel like he had won. The courtroom had been just another battleground, one in a series of many that he would have to face throughout his life. For him, the true test wasn't about securing a victory in a court of law. It was about continuing his relentless pursuit of a better future for humanity. After the trial, he took a short, well-deserved break. But soon, his mind wandered back to the bigger picture. There were still so many things to do, so many dreams to chase, and so many obstacles to overcome. Musk's mission was never a one-man job. Tesla had become a driving force in the electric vehicle industry, but it wasn't enough. SpaceX had made monumental strides in commercial space travel, but it needed to go further. The Mars mission was still on the horizon. But everything depended on one simple, yet complicated truth: progress never stops. He sat in his office, his eyes fixed on the blueprints of the next generation of SpaceX rockets. The faint hum of his employees working in the background did little to distract him. Musk had always been a visionary, but more and more, he realized that the vision was not the hard part. It was the execution, the constant battle against time, and the ever-present challenge of maintaining balance. One of the biggest hurdles was the way the public perceived him. He had always been a controversial figure, often the subject of ridicule, criticism, and even scorn. Some admired him as a genius, while others saw him as a reckless risk-taker whose ambition might one day lead to his downfall. He had faced ridicule throughout his career, whether it was for pushing the boundaries of electric cars, launching rockets into space, or even making bold and often controversial statements on social media. But after the trial, something had shifted. The public's perception of Elon Musk had always been polarizing, but now, after the trial, there was a noticeable shift. While some still viewed him with skepticism, others had gained a deeper respect for him. The emotional testimony during the trial, his vulnerability in admitting mistakes, and his overall commitment to a greater vision had softened the perception of the man behind the companies. People saw Musk as more than just a businessman. They saw him as someone who was willing to take enormous risks to achieve something greater than himself. The trial had been a moment of reckoning for Musk. It had reminded him that no matter how grand the vision, no matter how much he believed in the importance of his work, it would always be accompanied by consequences. For every victory, there were risks. For every success, there were failures. But Musk's ability to keep moving forward, despite everything, had earned him respect, perhaps even admiration. As he walked around the Tesla factory floor later that afternoon, Musk felt the familiar sense of purpose that had driven him all these years. The sound of machinery whirring, the workers collaborating on building the next generation battery, and the energy of progress all around him were what kept him going. Every day was an opportunity to push the limits further. But that also meant being prepared for setbacks. There would be new challenges, new trials, and new obstacles, but Musk was ready. His vision for a sustainable world was still intact. His goal to make life multiplanetary was still on the table. And yet, there was a quiet realization that he couldn't do it alone. The trial had forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities, not just as a businessman, but as a person. And in doing so, it had reminded him of the importance of the team behind him. Musk may have always been the face of his ventures, but they had been built by a collective effort. The engineers, the designers, the visionaries, his employees, were just as important in the long run. The trial had been a solo battle, but the future of humanity was a team effort. As he sat in his office, reviewing new proposals for Tesla's latest innovations in renewable energy, Musk made a promise to himself: he would never lose sight of the big picture. He would continue to innovate, to push the envelope, and to make the world a better place. But, this time, he would do it with more empathy, more understanding of the human cost, and with a greater focus on collaboration. The legal battles, the scrutiny, the emotional highs and lows of the trial had all played a role in reshaping Musk's mindset. He understood now, more than ever, that change didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't just about ideas, no matter how revolutionary they were. It was about the people who believed in those ideas and worked tirelessly to make them a reality. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mr. Musk, his assistant called. "We have the new data from the latest Falcon Heavy test. The Mars mission crew is ready for another debrief. And there's a new development in the AI integration project we've been working on with Tesla." Musk stood up, pushing the thoughts of the past aside. It was time to get back to work. The world wasn't waiting for him to recover from his trial, it was waiting for him to lead. And lead he would. He smiled to himself, walking out of the office with a sense of renewed purpose. There were rockets to launch, cars to produce, and a planet to save. The trial was behind him, but the journey was far from over. Elon Musk had been tested, but he wasn't done yet. The real work, as always, lay ahead. The first few months after the trial passed in a blur of new projects, unexpected challenges, and, surprisingly, new alliances. Elon Musk, a man who had long been accustomed to leading his ventures alone, found himself in the midst of a changing landscape. He had always believed that the key to success lay in his vision and determination, but as the months rolled on, he began to realize the growing importance of surrounding himself with not only brilliant minds but also people who could offer him perspectives he hadn't considered before. One of the most surprising developments came from a place he least expected: his legal team. After the trial, many of his lawyers had reached out, offering more than just professional congratulations. Some wanted to continue working with him, others sought to give him advice beyond just the legal realm. But one attorney, Rachel Abrams, stood out. Rachel wasn't just a brilliant litigator, she had a unique way of thinking that was outside the box, and it quickly became clear that her insights went far beyond law. Mr. Musk, Rachel said one morning as they sat in his office discussing a new project, have you considered the broader public relations impact of your next steps? Tesla and SpaceX are growing, yes, but the next challenge is not just technological innovation. It's managing the narrative, the perception of your journey, and how you navigate the legacy of your actions moving forward. Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. I've never really thought much about the narrative, Rachel. I've always focused on the mission, getting the job done. I don't have time for the PR side of things. Rachel smiled, unfazed by his dismissive tone. I get it. But what I think you need to realize, Elon, is that while you're focused on pushing humanity toward Mars, the world is watching your every move. You've got a vision, yes. But your critics, and your supporters, are just as invested in the story of how you get there. For the first time in a long time, Musk considered her words. Rachel wasn't saying anything that was particularly new, but the trial had exposed him to the real costs of how perception could shape his future. He'd seen how quickly a public misstep could turn into a legal quagmire. He'd also seen how, despite the positive outcome of the trial, the damage to his reputation had lingered in certain circles. I suppose you're right, Musk replied, his mind ticking. But I can't afford to get bogged down by media distractions. The mission is too important. Every minute I spend thinking about PR is a minute I'm not working toward creating the future. I'm not saying you need to lose focus, Elon, Rachel countered, but the story you tell can either support that mission or hinder it. Right now, you've got the opportunity to reshape that narrative, something many visionaries never get after a trial like yours. Rachel's words had struck a chord. Musk was known for his tunnel vision. His unrelenting focus on the bigger picture. But he realized that without a strong, well-managed narrative, that vision could easily be misinterpreted, misunderstood, or worse, tarnished beyond repair. Over the next few weeks, Musk began to slowly reconsider his approach to leadership. He had always seen himself as the lone soldier on the front lines, charging toward the future, but now he recognized that the future was a collective journey. The people around him, not just engineers, scientists, and astronauts, but also advisors, communicators, and marketers, played a critical role in shaping that future. Musk's genius had always been in recognizing potential, but now he needed to expand his definition of team beyond just the engineers in his employ. Rachel helped him draft a new public statement. It wasn't just about defending himself after the trial, but about framing his work in a new light. The message was clear. Yes, he was still the same Elon Musk, the visionary who dreamed of colonizing Mars and revolutionizing energy. But now, he was more than that. He was a leader who had learned from his mistakes, who had a deeper understanding of the world he was helping to shape. The statement was carefully crafted, emphasizing his commitment to the future of humanity, but also acknowledging the complexities of leadership. He spoke candidly about the challenges, both personal and professional, and the lessons he had learned through them. It was a departure from his usual public persona, a more human side of Elon Musk that many had never seen before. The response to the statement was overwhelmingly positive. The media, once hostile and critical, began to soften their tone. Instead of focusing solely on his legal troubles, outlets began to highlight his successes, his work on sustainable energy, his advances in space exploration, and his growing commitment to transparency and accountability. People were beginning to see the man behind the companies, not just the CEO. Rachel's influence on Musk was clear. She had given him the perspective he needed, not just as a lawyer, but as a voice of reason. Over time, Musk began to trust her judgment more and more. She became one of his most trusted allies, not just in the courtroom, but in the boardrooms of Tesla and SpaceX. As the months passed, Musk also began to notice a shift in his own mindset. He was still driven by his grand vision of changing the world, but he now understood that vision could only be realized if he worked alongside others, if he embraced the team and the support systems that could help bring his ideas to fruition. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Musk felt more prepared than ever. Despite all the progress, there were still challenges. Tesla's market share was continually threatened by new competitors in the electric vehicle space. SpaceX's Mars mission was still years away, and there were countless technical hurdles that could derail the plans. And as his companies continued to grow, the stakes only got higher. Musk knew the risks, but now, he was no longer facing them alone. He had allies who understood the importance of his vision, and together, they were ready to face whatever came next. Musk had always been a singular force, a man driven by his own vision. But now, after the trial and the lessons he had learned, he knew that true success was about more than just one person's ambitions. It was about a team, a collective effort to reach for the stars, quite literally. And in this new chapter, Musk would face the future not as a lone visionary, but as the leader of a movement, supported by a network of people who believed in the same dream. Despite the smooth transition back into the rhythm of life after the trial, Elon Musk quickly realized that even the most well-laid plans can be interrupted by unexpected challenges. His companies, Tesla and SpaceX, continued to soar in many ways, but new issues began to crop up. Problems that no amount of vision or determination could easily resolve. SpaceX, for example, was steadily progressing with its Mars mission, but the technological obstacles remained vast. Each test flight revealed new complexities, and as Musk himself would say, every solution creates 10 new problems. The drive for interplanetary travel was a daunting endeavor, but it was clear to Musk that he had no choice but to push ahead, despite the mounting difficulties. At the same time, Tesla, the company that had made him a household name, was facing its own set of challenges. Competition from established automakers in the electric vehicle market was heating up, and new regulations were looming on the horizon. The government was introducing stricter emission standards and carbon taxes, and Musk knew that for Tesla to continue its growth, it would need to remain agile and innovative. But agility and innovation were becoming harder to maintain in a world that was growing increasingly complex. What troubled him most, though, was the pressure of keeping $2 billion companies moving forward simultaneously. It wasn't just a matter of technology or engineering, it was about managing people, keeping the right talent on board, and ensuring that his team stayed motivated and focused. It had become clear that despite the support of his team, the onus of leadership fell squarely on his shoulders. And with that came the relentless stress of making decisions that could change the course of history, decisions that, if wrong, could lead to his company's downfall. One late afternoon, Musk sat in his office, the sunlight streaming in from the massive windows. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside, his mind was consumed with thoughts of what was coming next. He was reviewing plans for Tesla's next-generation battery technology when his phone rang. The screen flashed with a name he hadn't expected. "Good afternoon, Elon. It's Larry Page." Musk's brow furrowed, a slight edge of surprise in his voice. "Larry? What's up?" There was a pause before Larry's voice came through again, this time sounding more serious than usual. "I've been keeping an eye on Tesla, and I wanted to talk to you about something. I think we might be able to help each other." Musk leaned forward in his chair, intrigued. Larry Page, co-founder of Google and one of the most innovative minds of the 21st century, wasn't someone who offered help lightly. Their companies had collaborated before on a few ventures, but this felt different. "Go on," Musk said. "I know you've got your hands full with SpaceX and Tesla," Larry began. "But what if there was a way to accelerate some of your biggest projects, without draining more of your time and resources? We're working on something that could change everything for both Tesla and SpaceX. It's not just about the technology, it's about the ecosystem we can create around it." Musk was silent for a moment, mulling over what Larry had said. "I'm listening. What do you have in mind?" Larry went on to explain that Google had been developing a new form of quantum computing technology. Quantum computing, still in its infancy, had the potential to revolutionize nearly every field of science and technology. It could offer breakthroughs in everything from artificial intelligence to battery efficiency to propulsion systems for space exploration. "Imagine this," Larry said, his tone more animated now. "What if we could integrate quantum computing with Tesla's AI systems? Or, better yet, use it to optimize rocket design for SpaceX. The possibilities are limitless, Elon. But we'd need to move fast. Musk's mind was already racing. The thought of combining quantum computing with Tesla's AI seemed like a match made in tech heaven. If done right, it could push Tesla's self-driving capabilities to an entirely new level, allowing for quicker decision-making, better energy optimization, and perhaps even the ability to design cars that could learn and adapt to every driver's unique needs. As for SpaceX, quantum computing could revolutionize the way they handled spacecraft design and mission planning. But there were risks. Major risks. Quantum computing was still a highly experimental field. Tesla and SpaceX were already pushing the boundaries of innovation in their respective fields. Integrating a new and uncertain technology could lead to unforeseen complications. Musk had learned long ago that jumping into a new venture without thoroughly understanding its potential and pitfalls could lead to disaster. Still, the allure was undeniable. The prospect of bringing quantum computing into the fold was tempting, almost too tempting to ignore. "You're telling me you've got this technology ready to go?" Musk asked, his mind calculating the possible implications. Larry chuckled. "Not quite ready, but we're close. And we want you to be a part of it, before anyone else gets their hands on it. What do you say?" Musk stood up, walking over to the window and staring out at the vast sky. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city below. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was no ordinary opportunity. It was the chance to leapfrog the competition, to put Tesla and SpaceX at the forefront of a technological revolution. But at what cost? The familiar rush of excitement was there, the feeling that he was on the cusp of something truly groundbreaking. Yet, he also knew the consequences of rushing into something before it was ready. "Let me think about it," Musk said, his voice steady. "I need to make sure we've got the right people in place to pull this off." Larry didn't press him. "Take your time. But know that we're ready when you are." As Musk hung up the phone, his mind was in turmoil. The possibilities were limitless, but so were the risks. Was he ready to take the leap into the unknown once again? Was it time to gamble on a new technology that could change the course of his companies forever? Or would this be another case of stretching too far, too quickly? In the end, Musk knew one thing: there would always be risks. There would always be obstacles. But the future he was striving for was worth whatever challenge came his way. And so, as he sat back down at his desk, Elon Musk made a decision. It was time to take the next big step. Weeks passed after Elon Musk's conversation with Larry Page, and the idea of integrating quantum computing into Tesla and SpaceX began to take root in his mind. The risks were significant, but so were the potential rewards. Musk had always prided himself on his willingness to gamble on the future, but this was different. Quantum computing was still in its infancy, and the path forward was filled with uncertainty. However, he couldn't ignore the vision of how this technology could change everything. Tesla was already pushing the limits of AI and self-driving capabilities, but integrating quantum computing could unlock new possibilities: real-time optimization of driving algorithms, faster adaptation to changing environments, and perhaps even the ability to develop a truly autonomous vehicle fleet. And for SpaceX, the implications were even greater. Quantum computing could potentially revolutionize the design of rocket propulsion systems, reduce the time it took to simulate space missions, and even unlock new frontiers of space travel that were once thought to be impossible. But for Musk, the biggest challenge wasn't just about technological integration. It was about timing. The world had already seen his ambitious, high-stakes ventures, some of them successful, some of them filled with setbacks. If he moved too quickly, without proper preparation or understanding of quantum computing's true potential, he could risk everything he had worked so hard to build. If it failed, the backlash would be severe. Musk, however, was never one to shy away from risk. The last several years of his life had been a whirlwind of uncertainty, and yet, here he was, on the brink of something that could change the world forever. What was one more leap into the unknown? The decision was made. Musk called Larry back and confirmed that he was ready to move forward with the project. He had a team in place that would begin working closely with Google's quantum division, exploring the possibilities and charting a course for integration. There would be no turning back now. The first few weeks were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and brainstorming ideas. Google's quantum computing experts were in Musk's office, explaining the intricacies of quantum theory, the potential of qubits, and the challenges that came with it. Musk's engineers, Tesla's brightest minds, and the SpaceX team were all gathered together, ready to dive into this uncharted territory. Everyone was on edge, eager to see where this groundbreaking partnership could lead. But it wasn't easy. The first few simulations were a disaster. The quantum algorithms weren't working as expected, and the integration with Tesla's AI systems was creating more problems than it solved. There were days when Musk questioned whether they had made the right choice. The pressure was mounting, and the clock was ticking. He knew that his next big move would determine the future of his companies, and there were no guarantees. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Musk sat alone in his office, staring at the screens in front of him. The numbers on the simulations were still disappointing, and the sense of frustration was palpable. It felt as though the dream of integrating quantum computing was slipping further and further away. But then, something unexpected happened. Rachel Abrams, the attorney who had become one of Musk's most trusted allies, walked into the room. She wasn't there for legal matters, she was there as a friend, as someone who had seen Musk through his darkest moments. She had been following the developments with quantum computing, and she knew how much this meant to him. "Elon," Rachel said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "I know things are tough right now, but you've been in situations like this before. Remember how everyone doubted you when you started Tesla? When they said you'd never make it, that you couldn't change the way we think about energy? You've faced impossible odds and come out on top. Why should this be any different?" Musk looked up at her, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Because this is different. I'm not just building a car or a rocket anymore, Rachel. This is quantum computing. It's beyond anything we've ever worked with before. If it doesn't work, the fallout could be catastrophic." Rachel didn't flinch. She walked over to his desk, her eyes locking onto his. "Elon, you didn't get to where you are by playing it safe. If you've learned anything over the years, it's that setbacks are just stepping stones. You're not going to let a few bad simulations stop you, are you?" Musk sat back in his chair, his mind whirring with thoughts. Rachel was right. He had always pushed the boundaries, challenged the limits of what was possible. Every major achievement in his life had come with its own set of risks, its own set of failures. But each time, he had gotten up, dusted himself off, and kept moving forward. Why should this be any different? "Maybe you're right," Musk said quietly, a sense of resolve settling over him. "We're not going to let this setback define us." With renewed determination, Musk called in his top engineers and set up an emergency brainstorming session. It was time to dig deeper, to go back to the drawing board, and to push through the challenges they were facing with quantum integration. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and intense work. But then, on the fifth day, something clicked. The team had finally made a breakthrough. They had found a way to fine-tune the quantum algorithms, allowing them to interface seamlessly with Tesla's AI system. For the first time, they saw real, tangible results. The speed at which the system adapted to new environments and optimized driving patterns was unprecedented. The simulations, which had once been a chaotic mess, now ran smoothly. For the first time, Musk allowed himself to feel a spark of excitement. This was the moment they had been waiting for. He immediately called Larry Page to share the news. "We did it," Musk said, his voice barely containing his excitement. "We've cracked the code." Larry's voice was filled with relief and excitement. "I knew you could do it, Elon. This is the beginning of something massive. With the breakthrough, the trajectory for Tesla and SpaceX had shifted once again. The integration of quantum computing would not only push the boundaries of AI and self-driving technology, but it would also give SpaceX a significant edge in the race to Mars. Musk knew that this wasn't just a technological victory, it was a game-changer. As he stood at the window of his office, looking out at the city below, Musk reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The risks, the failures, the doubts, all of it had been worth it. This moment was the culmination of years of hard work, of relentless perseverance, and of never giving up in the face of adversity. But this was just the beginning. The real challenge, Musk knew, was not in making the breakthrough, but in how they would move forward. Quantum computing was still an emerging field, and they had only scratched the surface of its potential. The road ahead would be filled with more challenges, more risks, and more breakthroughs. But Musk was ready. With his team behind him, and a renewed sense of purpose, he was ready to take on whatever the future had in store. The breakthrough with quantum computing had breathed new life into Elon Musk's companies. Tesla's AI systems were operating at unprecedented levels, and SpaceX had begun testing new propulsion systems, promising faster and more efficient space travel. Musk's vision for the future seemed closer to realization with every passing day. But with great success came even greater challenges that tested not only Musk's technical acumen but his ability to handle public perception, regulatory pressures, and even personal crises. It was during this time, as Tesla was pushing the envelope on AI, that Musk found himself once again thrust into the media spotlight. This time, however, it wasn't the courtroom drama that had captivated the world. Instead, it was a different kind of attention, one that involved a heated exchange during a congressional hearing. The hearing, ostensibly about regulating AI technology and its implications for the future, was a tense affair. Musk had been called to testify, as both an innovator and a potential disruptor of the status quo. The stakes were high. Lawmakers, regulators, and the public were all watching closely to see how Musk would handle the scrutiny. Many saw him as a visionary, while others viewed him as reckless, a man pushing technology forward without considering the risks. Musk, who had prepared meticulously for the hearing, walked into the room with the same cool demeanor he always carried. His reputation for unconventional thinking and bold actions had earned him both admiration and contempt. But today, he wasn't just here to defend his companies, he was here to deliver a message that could change the way the world viewed innovation. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Lawmakers sat behind their desks, some with skeptical expressions, others with an eagerness to probe Musk's views. The cameras were rolling, and the public was tuned in. The first question came quickly, "Mr. Musk, your companies have made tremendous strides in AI, but many experts argue that the pace at which you're advancing could lead to unforeseen consequences. How do you justify this accelerated progress, especially when the risks of AI are not fully understood?" Musk leaned forward in his chair, his eyes steady. He had heard this question 100 times before, but now, with the world watching, he felt the weight of it more than ever. "First, let me clarify," Musk began, his voice calm yet authoritative. "AI is not a monolith. It's not a singular, all-powerful entity. The development of AI is just like the development of any other technology. We need to be thoughtful about how we design it and how we regulate it. But we can't be afraid to push forward. Innovation is never without risk, but if we don't take risks, we will stagnate." A murmur rippled through the room. Some lawmakers exchanged glances, impressed by Musk's confidence. Others were skeptical, unsure whether they could accept such a bold stance. One senator, a staunch critic of Musk's approach, leaned forward. "But Mr. Musk, you've made headlines for the wrong reasons. From self-driving car accidents to claims of overpromising and underdelivering, your companies have faced significant criticism. How do you respond to the accusation that your unchecked ambition could endanger people's lives?" Musk's expression didn't waver. He had anticipated this line of questioning. "I understand the concerns. But let me be clear, when it comes to Tesla, we are committed to safety. We have millions of miles of data from our vehicles on the road, and with every mile, we are learning and improving. It's important to note that no technology is perfect, but we are constantly improving. Every step forward is a step toward making the world a safer place. He paused, then continued. As for SpaceX, we're committed to making space travel safer and more accessible. Just like with AI, the road to Mars is filled with uncertainty. But it's also filled with potential. We cannot afford to let fear dictate our progress. The future is too important. At that moment, something shifted in the room. The tension that had been palpable at the beginning of the hearing began to fade. Musk's confidence and clarity cut through the skepticism, and for the first time in the hearing, a sense of agreement rippled through the audience. Even some of the harshest critics were beginning to soften. But then, just as the momentum seemed to be shifting in Musk's favor, a latecomer to the hearing, a well-known technology critic, interjected with a question designed to throw Musk off balance. "Mr. Musk, you talk about pushing the limits of innovation, but have you ever stopped to consider the ethical implications of your technology? Your companies are shaping the future of humanity, and yet you rarely address the moral questions surrounding that power. What about the people whose lives are impacted by your decisions? Have you ever thought about the ethical consequences of your ambition?" Musk took a deep breath, pausing for a moment to gather his thoughts. This was the toughest question yet, and it hit him where it hurt. Musk was no stranger to controversy, but the ethics of technology were something he had often struggled to explain to the public. "I think about that every day," Musk said slowly, his voice quieter now. "And I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. But I've always believed that if we want to make a better future, we have to act. We can't sit around waiting for someone else to solve the problems of the world. Whether it's climate change, space exploration, or AI, the stakes are too high for us to be paralyzed by fear or indecision." He looked directly at the critic, his gaze unwavering. "I don't expect everyone to agree with everything I do, but I am always thinking about the consequences. Every decision I make is made with the understanding that we have an obligation to do what's best for humanity. If we're going to build a future that's worth living in, we need to be bold. We need to act." The room fell silent. It wasn't the kind of response anyone had expected. Musk had transcended the typical back and forth of political arguments. Instead of just defending his companies, he had taken a step back and made the conversation about something bigger, the future of humanity. As the hearing drew to a close, there was no definitive winner. But Musk had delivered a masterclass on how to handle public scrutiny. His calm, measured responses had not only answered the questions but had redefined the terms of the debate. He had turned what could have been a disaster into a pivotal moment for his companies. And for his legacy. Later that evening, after the hearing had concluded, Musk sat in his office, watching the news coverage. The pundits and analysts were split. Some praised his performance, calling it a masterclass in crisis communication. Others remained skeptical, still questioning whether Musk's ambition had outpaced his consideration for the consequences. But Musk wasn't focused on the headlines. He knew that, in the end, the only thing that truly mattered was his ability to keep moving forward, toward a future he believed in. And with that, Musk made another decision. He would continue to push the boundaries, continue to innovate, and continue to build a future that no one else could imagine. The world was watching, and Musk was ready to shape it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. Do you think Elon Musk's approach to innovation is the right one? Are we ready for the changes he's bringing, or should we slow down? What do you think the future holds?